Information to help you run your business better and improve your marketing campaigns. My name is Hank Hoffmeier, and thank you for joining me on Hank's Marketing and Business Tips.
Welcome to episode 235 of the Hmbt podcast. Today I'm joined by Dr. Kevin Cordi. He's a national storytelling consultant. I'm excited to bring him on because you know me, I'm a public speaker and I believe in the power of story, whether it's in marketing, on the stage, or in life. Dr. Kevin, thank you for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on, and I think this is going to be a really great conversation.
I so appreciate being here as well, and all the stories that you've had on your podcast. And so I'm honored to be on this one.
So I think it's really important to talk about your background, as we did off camera. We spoke about some things that, you grew up around storytelling. You found out about the power of storytelling and narrative, as we're calling it. And I think then we can jump into using narrative in business and in life. So let's learn a little bit about you, because you have an interesting background. I want to hear more about your upbringing and why you felt narrative is important.
So I was raised on story. I would sit down on a dilapidated old couch as my 5 brothers and sisters would listen to my parents, who were from West Virginia. We only visited West Virginia our entire growing up time. But every day, my mother would tell me about Clay County, West Virginia. And my 5 brothers and sisters, we would sit and listen. And my mother would say, "You're not getting up until you hear this story." And she would teach us through the story. We could easily say things like, don't do this, don't do that. But when you hear that your Aunt Berthy, almost chopped someone's hand off with a hatchet, you're kind of mesmerized. You sit there, you listen, and story was the greatest teacher. So I went to Kent State University, and they had the Once Upon a Time Storytelling Conference. And people were paying a good bit of money just to hear story. And 300 people were sitting together, and they were 40 and 50, and I was 19, and they were ancient to my 19-year-old self. And I listened, and I heard stories. I heard Bat Burns, an Irish storyteller, tell about the fairy folk, and Appalachian clog dancer. And I watched people come together through story. I watched them talk about sensitive issues about having cancer, taking care of grandparents. And these complete strangers came together. And after that up and left, I was mesmerized by story, but it was nowhere in sight. The organized storytelling, I was 18, 19, they wanted to tell more, my peers wanted to tell more stories about cerveza than anything else. And I became one of the youngest touring storytellers in the country.
Awesome. A lot of times we hear about family members that are forcing stories on people. Like, you have to hear this, like John did this, and, here, hold my beer type stories. And you're like, oh God, here comes another one. Then you have your actual narrators, people that are intriguing. It sounds like, the stories you grew up on were interesting and you wanted to hear them. What are the differences in how you come across? How can you go from being someone that tells horrible stories to being a good narrator? What does that transition look like?
Well, the first thing is, I always say silence before sound. And so if you're coming to tell stories, or you're presenting, or you're selling a product, come in early. The best storytellers, the one that come in early so that they can cater to the audience. Storytelling is a unique medium. In theater, they have the fourth wall and its external environment that you don't see. You just pretend that there's a beach there. The fourth wall disappears in storytelling. It has to be an integrated connection between the teller, the listener, and the tale. And if you come in and you listen to the silence first, so then the sound happens, then you know the right story. At the end, you wait for more story, because the greatest gift that you can give is to listen to other people's stories that yours helped invite. And it is so important that you know your audience. Whether you're in business, you're not selling a product, you're selling an external world behind that product, within that product, what you're doing. If you're talking to people, you're talking to people. You're not making some panned scripted speech that you gave 1,000 times, because that's the only time you'll ever be there if you just keep doing the same thing. But if you listen to story, our brains are wired for story. In fact, let me quote Lisa Krohn says, "We think in story," I have it right up, "it's hardwired in our brain. It's how we make strategic sense of the otherwise overwhelming world around us." We need to think about that. We should respond in story more often in our day than we don't, or at least recognize that we do.
Right. And a lot of speakers, I think they get on stage or doing a webinar or whatever you want to call it, and they say what they want to say rather than telling the audience what they want to hear. And you mentioned something very important, learn your audience. And if I was to go on stage and talk about email marketing, I need to tell them what they want to hear, how to do it and why it's important, rather than maybe some cool features in a platform that, you know, I work with or something like that, or what I want to get across, what I feel is important, right? For me, maybe deliverability is important, getting the email into the inbox, but maybe folks who are just getting started don't even know anything about that. They don't want to know that. They want to know, how do I get my emails open? How do I get them clicked? And that's what I should talk about. If I did research onto the audience and it was, say, all small business owners, that's what I should talk about. Now, if it was like enterprise level marketers, they probably have been doing email marketing for decades. Maybe they do want to know, how do I get in the inbox today? You know, what's going on that stops me from getting into the inbox, and that can gauge my audience that way. And that's a good segue right there. Is, you know, narrative. I like using the word narrative rather than storytelling, because storytelling almost sounds like, you know, you're going to tell your child a bedtime story. But when you talk about narrative, that's a powerful word. Why should we use narrative in marketing and business? And I think you're going to be a great person to tell us why.
Uh, Jerome Bruner, as a social psychologist, said trouble is the engine of narrative. And if you look at people like Will Storr, who wrote The Science of Storytelling, he says that the major component of story is change and resistance to change. Whether I'm doing something as email marketing, or speaking at a firm, or just giving a live presentation, I need to use narrative to talk about change. Email doesn't have to be impersonal. You need to connect with authenticity and say, wow. You don't want to start with the generalized subject. You want to tell the single story, but not the danger of the single story, because then you can exclude, but the story that makes the impact toward change or resistance to change, and recognizes that the audience that you're working toward is where that change is focused toward. What's really important is that you be natural. You don't have to pretend to be something that you're not. And narrative works because it's how our brain works. As someone once said, a story is what the brain does. And so we need to think in story. We need to respond in story. I had the good fortune of studying both my master's and doctorate in storytelling and education. And I thought, oh, wow, I know all about this. But then I learned about the value of play. And play is not our rehearsal for life. It's the way that we re-energize our thinking. So when I go in to work as a story coach or story mediator, we literally play with the story in the present. So let me give you an example. If you were telling a story, I use theater practices, a number of different practices, to enter your story with the imagination, and we focus differently on how the story outcomes can go.
Let me see if this passes the Dr. Narrative test. And that's what I'm going to call you, Dr. Narrative from now on, because it just sounds so cool. Right. And it's like me when I get into like your elevator pitch, right? People ask me what to do. It took me a long time to get this. I say, I'm the digital marketing infotainer. I make marketing fun and successful. Then people say, wow, that's cool. Tell me a little bit more, rather than I say, oh, I work for an email marketing company. We help you create, send, and track emails. They're like, oh, okay, I'll let you know if I need you.
I want to speak just a minute before you ask the question.
Sure.
Pitch. I think the words elevator pitch is detached from the personal of what it should be. It should be the narrative that you offer to someone.
Yeah.
Stories are, as a Cheyenne storyteller once told me, and poet, stories are gifts. It's up to us to take them and receive them. I want you to think about when you say elevator pitch, that is an environment that you don't want to be in. That's an environment where you have to push a button to get out. Instead,
Oh man, I like
let,
that.
let's move the narrative. It's a co-created art. Narrative is about building together. It's the difference between what I call a journalist and a historiographer, and I've been both. A journalist looks for the lead, tries to move the story so that it's up for print. A historiographer is a person who spends time to find the story together that will help move the next direction. So
Right.
I don't like the words elevator.
So that's why I used to get people that I could see what's going on in their head. When the door's going to open? When are the doors going to open?
Exactly. Oh my gosh, they push 7 different buttons. But we need to take time for stories to emerge.
Right.
Often speakers come in and they rush their delivery. Often business people come in and say, I've got to get here from 7 o'clock to 7:30. I only have this much time. My thing is, you need to schedule more time so that you can make the connection that counts, not be in that rush.
And especially if you're at, let's say, a networking event, or maybe stuck in an elevator with someone, the what do you do is just a formality, right? Sometimes normally they don't really care. They just want to learn what you do a little bit so that they can just have a conversation with you. They're not looking to buy from you. They might not be ready to connect with you on LinkedIn. You don't know. So really using that narrative is powerful to really get that hook, and then just get them intrigued to have a further conversation either now or later down the road.
Well, some people ask, what do you do for a living? And I've stopped asking that. I turn to the person and I say, what brings joy in your life? And I get amazing answers. I'll be at a gas station or I'll be at a hotel, and I'll turn around and I'll say, what brings joy in your life? Or can you tell me a little bit about how this place came to be, or how long it's been here? We ask open questions that move story. So I actually spend a lot of time working and with people in responses for daily exercises for story. So for example, follow a stranger for 2 hours. Don't stalk them, but then keep a story journal that tells how to respond narratively. We need to look at our lives. So we need to listen to the silence. We want to go outside and see what stories are around us, in front of us. And people say, well, I'd like to use story more. Well, use it every day. Yeah. Reflect. In true reflection is when you become better at something. The first time you rode a bike, you didn't do it so well, but you did it every day, you got better at it. The same with the practice of science of story.
And I'm a avid people watcher, and I love to go and just sit and watch people and listen to them, and it's great. And I heard someone talk about developing stories by just absorbing what's in your environment and making notes, whether it's mental or, if you can't remember, into a notepad or something about things that happen during the day, and doesn't necessarily have to happen to you, because those are things you can recall later to use in your stories, which is important. And then you also hit on, maybe this is not 100% narrative, but when you walk into a store and they say, can I help you? It's just like, again, it's a formality, and you're, nope, just browsing. But if you say, what brings you into our store today? That's a different statement, and it opens up dialogue, right? And, oh, well, I was just coming in because my wife's across the hall shopping in that other store, so I thought I'd look around. Oh, so you're not looking for anything specific. I think it was, I forgot who it was, but it was a gentleman who walked into a sneaker store for that exact reason. You're just browsing, and the person says, oh, well, like what you said, like, what do you like doing? And he said, I'm a runner. And he looked at, are those the shoes you run in? He's like, well, actually, yes, they are. Well, those actually are kind of wrong for the type of running you do, because I guess the clerk found out he's a long distance runner. And what do you mean? Well, it has the wrong arches, this, that, and everything. Would you like to try a pair on that might be more comfortable? And he's like, well, okay. He said he walked out with 2 pairs afterwards or something.
Well, we also undermine wait time. I've been at a bank where I can see that the teller is just having a crazy time. And I've sat there, stood in front, waited till eyes meet eyes, and said, you're having a bad day, aren't you? Why don't you take a minute? And then let's go. Instead of being so frustrated, or I've thrown people a little bit where they say, can I help you with anything else? And I say, yeah, what is centripetal force? And they're like, what? I said, no, I'm just kidding. But, and then they ask and tell me, and we have a conversation.
Right. And laughter always helps, right?
Very much, as long as it's authentic, it's not
Yes.
panned. And you know, the whole thing, but the wait time is also very important. We want to rush to fill in sound, especially in story, but we need to stop. 70% of all communication is in how we breathe. So before I tell a story or give a speech, I literally breathe in and I say, I have a gift to give you. Will you accept it? I say this in my head. It gives me time to say, wow, this is the reason I'm presenting. And when I'm telling stories for like 1,000 people, I'll even say something like, let us go to Africa. Breathe in with me now. Because I know in those beautiful, intimate spaces between the notes, they're creating the story in their head so that it has the resonance and the impact that I need to make.
Right. And for me, I've had to overcome speaking on stage where I would be very fast, faster than I talk like I'm doing today. I would theoretically verbally vomit on people. I had to get my stuff out. I didn't want any space because I wanted to get through and get all that information into an action-packed hour of email marketing or social media. And I learned to pause, and I'm still doing it. I still have a long way to go. Trust me. Because as a speaker, if you stop for 2 seconds, like I just stopped there for like not even a quarter of a second, it felt like an hour.
Oh my
It's
God.
painful. But yeah, it's something you need to do. And I think I correlate that to white space in email, right? A lot of people want to cram their email full of product services and just text, right? And to say, I have to get all this out there because people need to read it, buy it, see it, whatever. But if you use less content in your email, sometimes it could be more powerful if you do it right. And now here's the question I have for you on the Dr. Narrative test. Okay. Um, I wrote a blog article a while back about using storytelling or narrative actually in email and how you can do that. And I would say, let's say I'm a restaurant owner. What I might want to do is talk about the challenge of the pandemic and how it changed my business and how I overcame that, right? It affected our sales. You know, we only make 30% of what we used to, but we're now offering curbside takeout. This is the things we did to implement safety, et cetera, et cetera. I think by doing something like that, even though it's kind of about the business owner and not really about the audience in a way, I think that narrative, people will read that and say, oh my God, I really care about this restaurant because I go there every now and then. This is what they're doing. This is how they're struggling. And then at the end, it's like, how can I help? It's go get curbside pickup. Would that be a good use of narrative in emails, like explaining a challenge you're going through and then how you're overcoming it?
So let's take that example. Here's the starting sentence. Yesterday, I was putting a closed sign on the door of my restaurant when the neighbor who had been there every day came up and said, can I help you? And then go into how she took the only and last $20 that she had and said, our neighborhood believes in you. This is why I'm not closing my door. I'm going curbside with the neighbors who are by my side. It's a lot when you explain using narrative, people are there with you. If you were generalized in saying, let me tell you a story about my business. We're going to curbside. We're going to have some specials. Which one do you remember?
Right. Well, the first one, and I would say take my money, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like every time an Apple product comes out, I say shut up and take my money before they're even done with the keynote. Because they're good with narrative.
Let me show you another example. What did you have for breakfast today?
Me, nothing yet. Just coffee because you and I get up early to be on this show.
Now watch this. Tell me about your breakfast.
Actually, it's interesting. I was debating whether I should say this. Last night, I was woken up at 2 o'clock with acid reflux, which I have not had in years, burned my throat, and I was up for hours. Therefore, every now and then I'm muting and I'm drinking my warm coffee, which is very soothing to me. Tastes very warm and soothing to my throat. And I just love holding the warm mug in my hands.
So we have warm and smoothing, and you're holding the mug, and it's more than what you said in the first one. Adrian Chambers is a children's writer who wrote a book called Tell Me, and said that when you ask why or what are you doing, it's really for that person who's asking. But if you say tell me, it invites a two-way conversation. So I would say Tell me about that being smoothing and warm to you.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Mm.
Tell me is extremely strong. Now, echo with that, the pausing. The average wait time is supposed to be 7 to 12 seconds to make a connection. That might drive you nuts on a podcast.
Yes. They're going to think that the recording stopped.
There you go. But we need to be more comfortable with silence so that we can get to sound.
Right, folks. And, definitely you want to include more rich information, about whatever you're eating for breakfast. And then, people can start more dialogue around it. And see, there was an intentional pause there. And it was painful for me.
I would invite listeners to open their space for practice in story and speaking. Here's the deal. A social psychologist, Lev Vygotsky, said, in problem-based play, we are quote unquote a head taller in our learning. But we are asked when we practice speeches or presentations, we do that to walls, or we go to a desk and we write down our ideas. I'm a writing coach for Ohio State. I believe in writing, but I often believe that you have to play out loud in the world that you're making with others before you're handcuffed to a script of your writing. We need to say, wow, I give myself permission to play. I actually have a pledge on that, but I give myself permission to take risks, to have fun, to make mistakes, because I know stories connect us and I am connected to story. The thing is, we think we can be creative alone at a desk when Vygotsky says in problem-based play, we're a head taller in our learning. We need to consider really anchoring our ideas and bouncing them back and forth with story-based play.
Well, Dr. Cordi, we're getting close to 20 minutes and I kind of want to wrap up the show, but I can see another episode coming up. I definitely need to have you on and we'll kind of get some more unpacking about narrative, because I think it's so important, because we didn't even touch on, the why we teach the power of public speaking, which you and I spoke about off mic, and why we need to embrace and actually tell others, whether it's our employees or our children, hey, you need to get in front of people and talk. And there's just so much more we can do. Hearing maybe more about your background will be very enticing. But what I want to do is have my audience know, how can they get in touch with you, learn more about you, connect with you, anything, website, social media, whatever you want to share.
Sure. But first I want to issue a challenge or an invitation. I want people to look at story in their life. Just take an hour or a day, whatever time they want to define, and look at how stories impact them. Look at both the stories they tell, the stories they receive, and the stories around them. And then start thinking, what would happen if I respond with a narrative mindset? And the whole idea, and that's something we can talk about, and I'm happy to do so, talk about the fear of public speaking that is artificial, and the narrative mindset that we need to adapt if we want to really produce change in the stories that we are telling and the stories that we are listening to. You can find me at Kevin Cordi, KevinCordi.com. The book that I wrote on play, you can order it there or Amazon or with Parkhurst Brothers. I also wrote a book called You Don't Know Jack, A Storyteller Goes to School, and I'm currently working on narrative mindset work as well. I've also released CDs and DVDs and all that crazy stuff, but I just so appreciate the opportunity to tell people and share about narrative and to learn from you and podcasts like this, because if we didn't have them, we'd be talking to ourselves and people would put us in small rooms.
It was
So
awesome.
thank you for the dialogue.
Yeah, this was a great episode. I can't wait to have you back on the show, because it's something that is of importance, telling your story to the world and how to do it, rather than, your family member forcing stories upon you that you don't want to hear, but rather making them intriguing. Years ago, before there was the internet and people sat down and actually had family dinners, there was probably many good stories to be heard, where now it's everybody's got their face in their phone, right?
Yes, we need to take a break from all that and listen more deeply to each other. And we can do that when it's daily practice that becomes a reflex action.
Right. And I don't think I can ever describe having a cup of coffee the same again. I think now I'm going to have to talk about how rich the color, what kind of mug I'm drinking it out of. I'm not going to
Tell
go
me
into a whole
more
story
about
about the Zion National Park mug I'm
Hey,
drinking
there
out
you go.
of.
That's the other thing. Everything around us could be an invitation to knowing more about a story. And if you're in a business room or something like that, there is an invitation of looking around. And if it's the only photo and it's of a little girl, of course you're going to say, "Can you tell me a little bit about that photo?" Instead of just, "Is that your daughter?" Is that your daughter? Only says yes or no.
Right.
Tell me about the young lady in the photo. It's striking. It
Awesome.
means it makes connections.
Take the challenge, visit the website. Dr. Narrative wants to help you, and we'll all be better for it. Folks, if you want to hear previous episodes, head over to hankhoffmeier.com/Alexa. You can listen in your browser. If you prefer iTunes, go there. I'm on the Apple, iTunes directory. I'm on Google Play. I'm on Spotify, anywhere you consume your podcast, as well as YouTube. This will be live on YouTube as well. Subscribe and like over there. Please give me some feedback on this episode, because I think it was wonderful, and I want to know if you have any questions that we can pose in the next episode and give you guys value, give you what you want rather than what we want to tell. We don't want to tell our stories. We want to tell you a narrative. Until
I'm
next week,
happy to
folks,
answer emails.
happy marketing.
Until we tell again.
Yes, I like that better.